My name is Jonathan Blake Hewer. I am Director of Emerging Technologies and Media Development at Ball State University. And really what I'm going to be talking about today is a bit of a personal journey that I went on that was kind of fun. So first of all, quick overview of disruption. And in particular, disrupting yourself, because I think we all become very attached to what we do. And then some new thing comes out, or there's some external pressure, and then all of a sudden we have to change what we're doing. And it's sometimes very difficult to do that with our own stuff, and we don't want to lose control of our stuff, so we got to figure out how to do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, and then I'm also going to basically lay out what I learned, and then kind of just the questions that I ask myself repeatedly, and that I have students and other faculty and whatnot that I work with, the questions that I ask them. And I think that asking the questions, the most basic, simple questions, over and over and over again, and coming back to those, are really helpful. So that's the plan. Disruptive innovation. Talked a little bit about it this morning. Basically, it's something new, right? It's new in a way that is typically in the tech world cheaper, faster, and it usually has to find some really new way of doing things. And so there can be financial disruptions. There's lots of ways to do this, but the real question is, how do you disrupt yourself? How do you bring these changes to yourself? And so me personally, I wrote I work with a group of students known as the Digital Core, and we had really good 100% employment over 5 years, all of that stuff. So the students did a great job of getting jobs, and so I was like, I'll write a book. By the way, my name is Jonathan Blake Hewer, and I always use my middle name because my dad is a professor named John Hewer, and he has written tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of books. So it was just kind of weird. It was like, maybe I should write a book. And then he got very excited about that. And it's interesting because if you search his name, you'll find a lot of things he did. I always say I don't like to take credit for his work. So anyways, he had a lot of advice and whatnot, so wrote a book. And I was very excited about this. And of course, one of my students came in and basically said, oh, you wrote a book. That's great. That's not very emerging of you. And so I was like, oh, well, you're right. So I want to make it into an app. And so eventually I did, and I can talk about the app a little bit later. But really what it is about going from the book to the app. How do you do that process? How do you deal with the introduction of technology? And also, most recently, I've been having some fun making it into a little YouTube channel. So I will show you that also. But the way that I look at it is, we talk a lot about the classic metaphor of the forest and the trees, right? You got to go between the forest and the trees and the forest and the trees. And the way that I try to remove myself or remove someone from the situation is to actually think in a lot smaller units. I kind of joke, we go from the forest to the trees back and forth a lot, but really when you want to just analyze something and separate it from yourself, try to separate out the emotions that are involved and the attachment that we have to the own thing, to our own projects and our own things that we work on. What is the smallest conceivable unit that you can approach it as? And so I'll get into that a little bit more later, but I always say, especially if you're working with a lot of technical people, you think you're getting down to this small unit, and then you talk to a programmer, you talk to someone who's working on creating a report or something like that, and they think it's such smaller units than your typical faculty does in terms of what it takes to do something, that thinking in those smallest possible units really helps you communicate your ideas and figure out new ways to innovate. So do a lot of paper prototypes. This was the first paper prototype that I did for my app. You'll notice, ironically, it stuck a lot with, about getting the people to buy the book. And it was kind of funny that's where my brain went at first, was like, oh, well, I should get people to buy the book. That's a great idea. Do you own it? No. OK, well, then we can take you to the website where you can buy it. We can take you to Amazon, stuff like that. And so I had this whole app completely built out. And a good friend of mine who works in the entertainment industry literally called me up because I included him on the beta, and I sent it to him. And he said, you took a movie and you made it, or you took a play and you made it into a movie by sticking a camera on a tripod and just recording it. And if you're in the entertainment industry, if you have any sort of media background, that's kind of a painful thing for someone to say to you. And I thought about this a lot. This was a really interesting thing. It led to a lot of thinking about the way that we all do things. And it made me start thinking about, classrooms and the way that we all think about learning, right? And this is not an original example, but really we introduced this amazing technology and didn't really change much, right? Like if you think of MOOCs and things like that. I was at an EDUCAUSE event, and someone said, why did we take the freshman lecture and then broadcast that to the world as our best idea? Like, why do we give that away for free? And I was like, oh, that's right. Why do we do that? And so I really started thinking about how we could transition this. And obviously, there's a lot of things out there, right? There's SAMR, things like that, to frameworks to think about this. And I approach it from a technology perspective. We're all in the business of learning, but how can we do that? How can technology impact that? And so I came up with some key questions that I think about. First of all, the forest, right? What is this about? What is this really about? And I think it's important to have that kind of overriding question. I always say put it on a Post-it note and stick it on your computer, so that whenever you're wondering something that you're working on, you can look at that and remind yourself, what is this really about? What is it that we're really trying to do? The next thing is, what is the existing artifact about? And sometimes it's hard to know what that's really about. What is the current form, whatever it is? What is that really about? Then you get into the technology itself. What does the existing technology do? What makes it unique? What does the new technology do? The disruptive thing, hopefully. And then, really, when you think about it, what does this new way of approaching this do? Okay, so it's kind of like you're introducing a new tree, but you have to go back to the overriding principle, the overriding theme. And I find that going to the overriding theme is very helpful also, because it builds that sort of team unity. So if you've got a group of people and you're working on something, going back to that theme of like, okay, can we all agree what the overriding principle of this is? Then, as you introduce new technologies, as you introduce new ways to do things, you can then go back down to that level and be like, okay, does this fit into that overriding theme or not? And so for my book, it was really about helping students get jobs. That's what it's really about, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's about. And so when you think about it, I like to think in Venn diagrams. Oh, it's cut off at the bottom, but basically it says technology down there. And so I like to think in terms of Venn diagrams. That tends to be the way that my brain thinks. And so I thought about this. Okay, there's a book and there's an app, right? And an app is a particular form of technology. So what are the unique qualities of a book? Well, a book has unlimited battery life, right? You can carry it around forever. It's not going to run out. You have the ability to mark pages. We all dog-ear pages. It's very easy to use. I think most people can use a book. And then also, it's surprisingly durable, right? Books have been around for centuries now. There's also a lot of overlap between the two. They both have portability. They both have the ability to display text. And one of the things that was most interesting about my book that surprised me when I gave it to students in the office to read, I said, hey, what do you think? Most of them didn't start at the beginning. They actually went to one or two chapters that were very particular to what they were interested in terms of getting a job at that moment. And so I was like, oh yeah, here I was trying to design this system that students could go through from beginning to end to make sure that they were prepared. Instead, they immediately just picked and chose, interactively what they wanted from the book. And so I always try to remember, yes, books are actually interactive, and they're not this static medium. So then in terms of the app, what does the app actually do? What are the different qualities? It has a camera, there's some responsiveness and customization, and then, of course, sharing and connectivity, right? It's hard to share things out of a book. And so going back to those overriding questions, when you think about it, the book is really about knowledge transfer. It's about getting knowledge from one place into another. The app is about practicing. That's what it really came down to. The app lets you practice and engage in it in a way that the book doesn't. And so that's kind of the way that I eventually organized it. One was to learn, and the other was to practice. Two separate things. But going back to that Venn diagram, something that's very important to me also to recognize is as we bring in new technologies and they inherently disrupt the old ones go away. And so when I thought about the Venn diagram, it's like, okay, what are we losing when the old technology goes away also? And that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about. It's very easy to get excited about the new stuff. You know, we all love new technology. I mean, the 3D printing stuff this morning, that's awesome, right? So what are we replacing? What is that? What goes away with that? And so on this, it's very interesting to me. The practicing part with the app is arguably more fun. It's more engaging. But there is still, and there's studies that back this up, that special value in reading and engaging with a book and the way that that imparts on your brain. I always find it very interesting looking at the studies comparing, you know, like ebooks and hypertext and whatnot with traditional paper books, because in my mind, I immediately think of like, there's so many variables though. Like, what about the screen, the light conditions in the room? You know, I mean, what font was chosen, so forth and so on. And so the book still has a value. It still has a place, even though it's an old technology. So the app itself, just to kind of wrap up this thread, the app itself basically asks you questions using the front-facing camera, and you answer them. And it just records you and then plays it back for you. Very, very simple. Arguably very painful, by the way. It's funny for a selfie generation to have to do this. They hate it. Absolutely hate it. And there's actually a little switch down at the bottom now, so it puts up a little screen to just kind of hide yourself while recording, so you don't have to look at yourself. And so I think it's a lot of fun to really confront yourself with what it is that you actually say and how you present yourself, so forth and so on. The other thing that's been interesting in this is a lot more interviews now are done, first-round interviews are done over webcams. So this is actually a realistic preparation for what a lot of students have to go through. And then there's also a list feature in the book, in the app, that was listed in the book but is in there. Just for fun, we had some fun putting some comics in to try to attach some interest to this. And so again, get some character in there. What's funny is everybody likes the comics, and I discovered that people were flipping through reading the comics at every chapter and then skipping most of the chapters. So that was kind of entertaining. And then of course, the next phase after I made the app was the YouTube version, right? So what does the YouTube version look like? I don't know how many of you watch YouTube or you're aware of, how many of you like regularly watch YouTube? Okay, so most of you watch. There was a report earlier this year in Variety, I think it was in August, so almost a year ago, that said that 14 to 16-year-olds rated YouTube stars higher than any existing television star. I mean, think about that. That's just ridiculously mind-boggling to me. How many millions of dollars are spent on TV shows? And they like YouTube bloggers. Like, that vloggers are the thing. So I thought I'd try this. And so a student actually helped me get started on all this. And of course, guys, don't forget about facial hair. Whether it's scruffy, clean-shaven, or stash. Just make sure you're leaving the impression that you want to leave. Subscribe. I've been told that the stash version of me is impossible to get out of your head, so I apologize. So anyways, again, looking at this, right? YouTube is an entirely different way of communicating. My background is editing, by the way. I can't stand editing on YouTube. It's terrible. But that's the style, and that is the piece of that is particular to that technology. So looking at this, there's the book, then there's the app, and then there's the YouTube channel. And again, breaking these down, I made lists of like, okay, what are the qualities here, and how can I get these to work together? And it's funny, by the way, this is a slightly different example, but any Star Wars fans here? This is exactly what Disney's ultimate objective is, in case you didn't know that. Their plan is to take the Star Wars universe and push it out through every known media ever created. There's TV shows, there's movies, there's video games, there's books. And what they've done is they have gone in and customized the different pieces of that story that can be applied to each one of those particular genres. And so for me, I've been trying to think about this in terms of education. What does that look like? What does it look like taking the subjects that we're all familiar with, the new subjects that are evolving, and changing them and manipulating them and tailoring them to every conceivable medium that we're all capable of working with in higher ed? And I think that for me, a lot of this comes down to, again, that forest and trees analogy. It's very easy to say we're introducing iPhones, we're introducing mobile devices, we're introducing iPads, we're introducing Chromebooks. And so when you think about the iPhone, there's actually a long list of technologies that are included in there. And I find that it's frequently overwhelming. So it's like, okay, what are just call them out. What are some of the technology features in an iPhone or in basically any mobile phone? Camera, GPS, compass, accelerometer. Say what? Flashlight, yeah. Flashes, I mean, yeah. Obviously, connectivity. Have any of you seen like the microscope attachments? There's awesome like Bluetooth microscope attachments or Wi-Fi microscopes. There's water meters. There's all sorts of scientific tools. And to me, it's really overwhelming. And so what I've been working with this history professor lately on a project. And so what I've been trying to do is really break it down and be like, okay, just the camera, just that smallest unit, what can you do with just the camera? And then you kind of go to the next thing. Okay, just the compass, just some sort of social media, and really break it down. And then match those together. What can you do with the camera and GPS? What can you do with the GPS and compass? What can you do with GPS and map? And we've been trying to come up with some really cool ways to ask better questions, basically, for his project. And so again, the way that I like to think about this is forest and the trees. We talk about that a lot. And then really get down to the leaf. How can we get down to the smallest unit so that we can detach ourselves from that and say, okay, with this one little piece of this technology, what can we do? And so personally, and having been through this process now a couple times on various projects as new technologies come out, it's very hard to let go of the old way of doing things. I'll be honest, one of the first big projects that I worked on after coming to Ball State was we basically came up with a better way to do multiple choice, and I was really excited about it. And then after that, it was like, why are we doing this? Why are we making more efficient multiple choice, right? Because there are so many better ways to do this, and that's now what we're looking at. So to bring this up again, these are the questions again. What is it really about? What is the overriding theme? And like I said, my advice is always to put it on a Post-it note, stick it on your computer, and look at it every time. Then the next one, what is the existing artifact really about? And sometimes this is the hard one to think about. What does it really, really do? What are the unique qualities of the existing technology? What are the unique qualities of the new technology? And then figure out what is that new version about. So what I always like to do is kind of run through this and ask any questions that you have or talk about any challenges that you have right now. You've got a group of people in here who have experience and have interest in what the topic is. So I'm curious to know, does anyone have any particular challenges or examples that they'd like to share where they've done this or where they're working through this right now? Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting. So my first thought when you said that was thinking about the specific technologies, right? So like let's think about what we saw this morning with a makerspace. If we applied that technology, my first thing is printing out ruins. And I'll be honest, I know nothing about ancient Rome. I have a difficult time. I couldn't even identify those trees. I kind of always joke about this. Like you could hold up pretty much any connector in the last 20 years, and I can tell you exactly what it is and what it was for. But I know very little, if anything, about that space. And so my first thought is like, okay, what are the technologies? Well, if we think about the maker technology, right? What could be done with it? Well, we can print stuff out. We can print out those artifacts. We can play in that 3D space online and then print out the various artifacts to engage with them. To me, I would say, again, it goes back to, what is the unique about the way that it's done now, and what's unique about the introduction of technology. So taking it a step down, I'm actually working on a history book right now with a history professor. And what we're doing is we've now transitioned through 2 technologies because we kind of picked the wrong one. And it got deprecated by the manufacturer. So now all of a sudden we have all of this content that we've created, all this work that's gone into it, and now we have to transition it again. And so what we're doing is we're transitioning it as a responsive website because we picked an iPad version basically, and it's a 4th grade history book for on Indiana history. And of course, one of the first things one of the schools said is like, well, what about snow days? Like some of our students don't take the iPads home. We have a class set. And then it was like, well, how do they access it? Like it just all of these different parameters. And so we had to think like, okay, how do we tackle all of those? And so unfortunately, in that one, we've had to think very differently and think about the lowest common denominator. In terms of yours, what I would say is what's most interesting to me about generically about technology, and again, not knowing about the specifics. First of all, it allows a level of customization to individual student. I mean, ideally, in the ideal world, the technology should keep each student at their optimal challenge point the entire time, so that they're, it's that classic flow, right? The classic combination of individual challenge to their current existing knowledge, and also continuing to, introduce new pieces in ways that they can manage and digest. So what I would do is I would look at whatever the new technology is that you have available or that you want to introduce and break that down into the tiniest pieces as far as what can you do to disrupt what you're doing in small ways. And again, it's very difficult to do in terms of it's very easy to just transition, right? Again, talking about like a SAMR model, it's very easy to just, here's your book, close your eyes, take out the book, put it on an iPad with the book on it, open your eyes, okay, look, we're done. And that's again where I say, like, okay, if you've just done that, what are all of those new pieces, all those new technological options available, like the connectivity and just the interactive tools that you can make in simple widget makers? What are the different ways that you can do that? What are different ways to ask questions? What are different ways, assessment, all of those pieces that come together in it. And that's why I try to break it down into the smallest pieces. And what I've been trying to do is this professor, we've been working on this for almost a year now. And what I do is I kind of introduce things just in a very, very narrow range, kind of like at the branch level of like, here's one new thing. Could you do anything with that? What could you do? Instead of making it overwhelming. Another example, this is kind of comes from design, by the way. It's like, has anybody built a house ever? Like design, So like, you go into like the design studio, right? And there's just design samples everywhere. And for a lot of people, that's very overwhelming. And so what usually you can do, one trick, is you just take like 2 at a time. Okay, which one do you like better? Yes, no. Which one do you like better? And just present them 2 at a time. And it very quickly narrows down your selection. And so my basic experience and my point in this is that when you introduce new technology today, so much of it, because it's interconnected, it's part of an ecosystem, it's all of those things, it's very overwhelming. And it's difficult to separate and not take it in those individual pieces. And so by introducing the technology in the smallest possible levels, 1 at a time, it lets you really think like, okay, what is the option with this technology? And then, of course, you have to decide where you want to invest your time and resources to utilize that. You might come up with 10 ideas, but all 10 of them might not be great. So then you have to narrow it down. But I think that we're in an age, for better or worse, of technological abundancy. And so there is that overwhelming factor, changing, new disruptions all the time. So how do you manage all of that while keeping the overarching theme? I mean, at the end of the day, you still need to learn history. Yeah?
Did you do anything different in the actual printed product that lends itself to either having students think about using the app and integrating the two, or how did you manage that part?
That's a very interesting question. So one of the cool things about the whole print-on-demand world is that you can make little tweaks along the way. So I have. What was actually, yeah, it's all print-on-demand, which I think is just the coolest thing ever. But I have actually. I've gone back, and what's been more interesting is as I've gotten feedback on either one, I've been able to go in and tweak the book to add a question here or there, and same thing on the app to tweak the questions. And really, again, ironically, a lot of what the lists in the book are a similar process. Like, it's breaking it down into those smaller levels. Like, there's a list of getting ready for your interview, and one of the questions that it asks is, what time do you have what time is your interview? And it's kind of like, so what time do you need to leave for your interview? So what time do you need to start getting ready for your interview? Like, what I try to do in the book is to get students to think in much, much smaller pieces, because I think that's where a lot of the challenge in my experience breaks down. And a lot of this came from, there's research on voting. What does it take to get a person to the poll? And so basically, if you ask someone, like, are you going to vote? They say yes. And if you ask them, what time do you need to leave to get to the poll before it closes? Or if you ask them very specific questions, where is your polling place? Those are much better indicators of whether or not they will actually vote. And so what I've been trying to think is, like, okay, what are those indicators that determine whether or not someone is really prepared, whether or not they're really thinking about the preparation deeply? And so same thing with technology. I think there's a lot of people we can say, are you comfortable with technology? Well, yes, I am. There's these broad questions that we ask. And depending on your existing level of comfort with technology and where you're coming from, if you're working with, faculty, if you're working with a subject matter expert, whatever it is, and you ask these kind of broad questions, there's usually the answer is usually, yes, I'm comfortable with this. Yes, I understand this. Yes, I know it. And so what I try to do is break things down into the smallest pieces where it again removes that, and it's much more an indicator of, like, okay, are they really comfortable with this? And have they really thought about this particular piece? Because like I said, it's like, are you comfortable with your iPhone? Yeah, I use my iPhone all the time. Like, what do you use it for? Making calls. I mean, okay, well, there's a lot more it could do than that. And so that's where, again, in the introduction of new pieces into working on this history book, I've realized this a lot with schools. Like, they get excited about the iPad. They introduce the iPad in there. They introduce Chromebooks in there, but they don't break it down into the individual pieces and think, like, okay, we're not introducing one thing. We're really introducing like 50 new things. So how can each one of those and the smallest little piece be used to improve what we're doing? And that's where I try to look for those kind of questions still and figure out, usually around MDM, for example, in the schools I found, is a pretty easy question. How are you managing your devices? And then I can very quickly figure out, how much thought they've really put into the implementation. And that's where, again, on this, for me, it's very difficult to take something you've done and transition it. And so what I found is that breaking into the smallest piece really allowed me to remove myself from that process and be like, okay, I'm not changing everything. I'm just looking at this one little thing. That's okay. And then, you take a couple steps back and you realize, oh, I've actually, by changing all these few little things, I've actually changed a lot. And that's really, for me, the way to get over that. Because if not, you're like, well, I've put a lot of effort into this. I think it's great. And, everybody has that, right? We all take a lot of pride in what we do. And so that makes it very difficult to take those steps and really just start throwing away stuff that you've done to build out the new. So we're out of time, unfortunately, but I'll stick around if anybody has any questions. That's my Twitter handle down there, as well as YouTube and everything else. So feel free to follow and tweet and Insta, and I'm not on Pinterest. But otherwise, feel free to reach out and get in touch. And if you have any questions, like I said, I'm more than happy to answer them. And thank you very much for coming this morning.